Morning folks, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. Back out here with another video in our basic bushcraft series. What I want to do today is I want to show you how to set up what's called a forester's tent with your 8x8 tarp. This tent will allow you to take better advantage of your fire and the radiant heat, and also trap heat inside the shelter to take advantage of convection. So let me get this thing going here. We'll unpack our Roycroft frame, get the tarp off of it, and we'll start talking about how to set this dude up. Stay with me. Okay, so when we're selecting an area to set up our camp, no matter what type of shelter configuration we're going to use, the first thing we want to think about is what's called the 4 W's. We want to look at the direction of the wind. Are we close to water? Do we have plenty of viable firewood for the night? And are there any widowmakers above us? And when I mean widowmakers, I mean dead standing trees or limbs that are going to fall on us during a storm or anything like that during the night. Are they going to fall on top of our camp and hurt us? That becomes a widowmaker. So looking around right now, we have a large deadfall pine behind us that's going to give us plenty of firewood even to get through a cold night just off that one tree, especially if we have a buck saw or an axe. I have a creek bed down below me that's going to give me water. The wind direction generally comes out of the north in Ohio. Sun's coming out now. Man, it's going to get warm. Nice. By warm, I mean above 30 degrees. But anyway, so the wind is going to come off of an adjacent ridge, and it's not going to hurt us any because we got plenty of cover right here. Widowmakers, I've looked around above me. I've got a pine beside me, a large pine beside me. That doesn't have any dead branches on it. It's a good live pine. Everything else around me is small oaks and hickories. And when I mean small, I mean stuff this big around or less. So I'm in a pretty good location with quite a few pines around me to get fat wood off of, to get lower branches off of. I've got this huge pine behind me. I've got water. I don't have to worry about the wind, and I'm in no worries of having any widowmakers above me. So this is going to be a good spot for our camp tonight. Let's get our tarp out and set up our forester's tent. Okay, so once I've selected the location I'm going to set up my camp, I've checked out the 4 W's and I know I'm good to go there. The next thing I want to decide is what piece of ground in this area do I want to set up my camp? And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for something that's not high on a ridge, because that's going to be wind blown. I'm not looking for something that's in the bottom, because that's going to be a problem for drainage and also the fact that cold air sinks and heat air rises. So what I'm really looking for is something in between the two. Something that's on fairly level ground. I'm not going to have to worry about ditching around my tent to keep water out of it, or ditching around my tarp setup to keep water out of it. But at the same time, something that's on low enough ground that I'm not on the highest piece of ground in the area where I'm going to suffer from convective breezes from the wind if I don't have to. I want to get the front of my shelter facing southeast so that I can take advantage of that morning sun when it comes up to heat up my tarp setup and heat up my camp. I'm looking at the sun right now, so our shelter should be facing somewhat this way. I've picked a pretty level piece of ground. I'm going to go around in this area and make sure that there's no stick-ups or anything, like small trees that are starting to grow up, like saplings, like the one I've got right below my foot here. And I'm going to cut those out, sweep the area really good for big sticks or rocks, things like that, in an area that's about 8x8, where I'm going to put my tarp, and then I'm going to start setting it up. Okay, so here's what our forester's tent looks like when we're done. And I'm going to show you how to set this up real quick. It's very simple. This is a 1-pole design, so you do have one line coming off this pole, and you can run it fairly close to the pole. But the idea of this shelter really is with these flaps, you have a fire out here a little ways away from the shelter, and if you put a backstop, a log backstop behind that fire, set that up kind of like a Nesmik self-feeding fire that you would have during the night, you're going to feed that heat into the shelter and take advantage of convection in there and trap a lot of that heat with these low-hanging flaps. And these can be adjusted because you've got extra material here. You can adjust these down to where they're pretty close to this line, just like this, and they'll hold quite a bit of heat in that shelter. You can also open this thing all the way up if you wanted to, like this, during the day, so that you can work inside there, and you give yourself a little bit of dry floor area in there for storage on the side with these flaps that are turned in. And then of course you'd fill this thing with leaves, your browse bed, or your ground pad, or wherever you chose to sleep in. But it's at least 6 feet deep, a little bit longer than 6 feet deep, so plenty long enough for one person to be in there. But it's an easy way for you to set up an 8x8 in an enclosed type configuration where you're going to get more heat trapped inside that shelter from a fire if that's what you're trying to use to heat the shelter. And you could also heat something up like this very easily with a candle, and it would hold a lot of heat as well. Okay, so I'm going to lay my tarp out in a diamond here to begin with, and I'm going to stake out this corner, this very back corner. Okay, so here's our tarp the way we had it laid out originally, and we've got it laid out in diamond fashion. Then I folded this one corner in to about where my third tie out is, out here on the edge of my tarp, just like that, okay? And that's going to be my tie off point for my center pole. Okay, so once I got my center pole in, I just picked my tarp up, pulled it tight, moved up one tie out point from the corner and pulled that out to see where that needed to lay. Folded that underneath and pulled it out fairly tight and temporarily staked that down. So I'll just push that out fairly tight, stake it down with my hand for a minute, come over here and stake the other side down exactly the same way. Tuck that in, just like that, and stake it down. And then you can make your adjustments from there, because that doesn't need to be real tight. And then you can make all of your adjustments from there with this tent. Okay, one thing I want to make sure that I mention here so that we're on the same page is once you gather this material up on the top, make sure that the tie out is on the outside of those two pieces of material so you've got them both in there. The reason for that is when you drop these flaps down to take advantage of that convection, you want to make sure, and to hold heat in there, you want to make sure that you can do that. To be able to drop that down, you've got to be able to have that on the outside. If it's on the inside, you're not going to be able to drop it down, but that gives you flaps that will better hold that heat in there, but still gives you a little bit of airflow in there. And then of course you can drop these back all the way if you want to. But a candle at the base of this pole would heat that shelter up really well. But for sake of what we're talking about, we would want to fire out here, you know, about one full step away. We'd build a little bit of a backstop behind it, and that's what we would heat this shelter up with. And because it's in the shape pretty much of a cone back there, it's going to hold that heat, trapping it inside and not releasing it except out here. Once we drop these flaps down, it's going to hold even more heat in. So that was the concept behind the forester's tent, and it can be set up, you know, in a tarp tent configuration using an 8x8 square tarp fairly simply. Okay folks, well I appreciate you joining me out here for another short video today on another simple setup with your tarp. I appreciate your views, I appreciate your support, I thank you for your comments, I thank you for everything you do for me, for my school, for my family, my business, my friends, and everyone affiliated with the Pathfinder School. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks guys.